All right, great. So I want to start off. It's going to be a fun class. We're going to have a lot of fun today. I'm looking forward. Just a quick recap before as we get warmed up here today. We're learning the captivating cases of rabbinic responsa, which is some of the most interesting questions that have been posed to rabbis in the past 2,000 years or so, or maybe even more. We started off, this is our third lesson. Our first lesson we analyzed the questions just to give us an introduction into the world that we're not even familiar with. That was in lesson one. And if you missed it, by the way, we sent you the video. You can watch it if you want to. In lesson two last week, moved on from the questions into the answers, and we spoke about the wacky world of due diligence. Of all the interesting explorations the rabbis have to do, like sailing up the River Nile, in order to figure out how things work, in order to be able to give a coherent response. But today, we're going to take it one step further. Today, we're going to learn about the art of formulating the response beyond the due diligence. How do they actually come up with the answer? How do the rabbis know what to say? You see, when the answers are clear, it's not a big deal. Like, Rabbi, are you allowed to, how many hours do you have to wait after eating meat before you can eat milk? Right? Okay, that's clear. The rabbi can tell you what it says in the good books. That's explicit. It's straight up. You don't really need a rabbi for that. Maybe you could use Google or AI or something like that, even though there's a lot of corruption in AI. And I'm very upset with my AI because I think that my ChatGPT has an anti-Semitic bias. I asked ChatGPT if he or she or it has an anti-Israel bias. They said no. I said, were you programmed to say that? Because that was not right, what they said to me. I didn't like it. But hey, real people comes in handy. Exceptional rabbinic insight is displayed when resolving modern dilemmas that lack a direct scriptural or code-based answer. Because now you got to deal with a question that's never been asked before. And that's what we're going to learn today about the art of precedent, where scholars need to identify ancient scenarios with shared underlying logic in order to ensure that the ruling is an extension of divine intent rather than their personal views. Let's talk about the historical origin of this method. I'm going to go straight into Moses. So Moses comes down the mountain, Mount Sinai, 2,448 since the creation of the world, 3,338 years ago. And he's carrying with him several items. He's got the 10 Commandments on 2 tablets of sapphire. A lot of people don't know that it was sapphire. Interesting, right? And they were square too, by the way. They weren't rounded. Interesting, right? See, you learned something. That's another class. But the short version, Nancy, the short version to the answer is, how do we know that? We know that there was not an inch of wasted space in the temple. Where were the tablets stored? Inside of the Ark of the Covenant. Since it was square, if they had curved edges, there would have been wasted edges. That's how we know. Okay? Anyways, interesting, right? If you walk into any shul in the world and you see square tablets on the Ark, like, rendering, you know you're in a Chabad shul because this is a novelty that the Rebbe taught. Interesting. So Moses comes down from the mountain. He's got 2 tablets of sapphire with the 10 commandments, right? He's also got the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses. He also has the oral Torah. The oral Torah, interesting, right? That's the oral explanation of the Torah, what's known as the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Talmud. And he also has something else. I mean, it's a little overwhelming. Forgive me if I am. The fourth thing, in addition to the 10 Commandments, the written Torah, the oral Torah, he also has the secret Torah, what's known as the Kabbalah, in his head. Whatever. He sees the Jewish people worshiping an idol, the golden calf. Oy vey. So what does he do? He smashes the tablets onto the floor. Seriously? Why are you smashing the tablets on the floor? What inspired Moses to do this? Who told him to do this? Let's take a look. Take a look at text number 1, page 103. The Talmud asks this question. What reasoning did Moses apply to break the tablets? Page 103. And the Talmud answers, he said, I was explicitly told that an idol worshiper may not eat from the Paschal lamb. The Paschal lamb is the offering of Passover. If somebody who's worshiping idols can't eat from the Paschal lamb, which is only one of the 613 commandments, so an idol worshiper cannot experience one commandment. If so, now that Israel has worshipped the golden calf, they're worshiping idols, so certainly they are unworthy of receiving all the commandments. It's an a fortiori argument. If this is true about one commandment, how much more so is true about all the commandments? Yes, Nancy. Was it not an act of fit of rage? I would respectfully disagree with that, because Moses is not just an ordinary Joe the plumber. You talk about Moses. I mean, Nancy, this guy was vetted by God Almighty himself, right? Seriously. You'd think that this would be the paradigm of what a human being is capable of reaching. And that is how the Torah actually interprets the acts of the biblical characters. That each action of theirs bears tremendous teachings as opposed to human failing. And that's why they were recorded for posterity. Not because we're just a history book that Bill is reading, right? It's a Torah. It's an eternal, timeless message. Every nuance, every word, every omission, every redundancy is purposeful. Okay? So Moses smashes the tablets, yeah.
Wasn't part of it the fact that they were breaking such a serious mitzvah? Because there are 613 mitzvahs. Fortunately, most of us are breaking them every day or every week, one of the mitzvahs. But we're not idol worshippers. To me,
That's a very serious one. I mean, seriously, they just got married to God on Mount Sinai. And during the honeymoon, I mean, this is 40 days later. During the honeymoon, they're cheating with another God. I mean, a little shame. Now, let me say this. For starters, I have so much to unpack about what you just said. Number one, they didn't really commit idolatry the way it looks like at face value. If you read the verse, it says that they thought Moses died, and that's why they made an idol. Which means they just felt that they couldn't connect with an ethereal, abstract, invisible God. They needed a rabbi, like a connector. So they just wanted to make this thing, which they knew was going to be in the Ark of the Covenant, a golden box. So it wasn't at face value like straight up idolatry. Another thing I want to disagree with you with, Joel, respectfully, is that I don't believe that all Jews are violating great sins every day. We call them tinok shenishba, a child who was taken captive at a young age and not taught. Imagine a Jew is taken captive at a young age, and he violates the Shabbos because he doesn't know about it. Is he sinning? Not sinning. He doesn't know anything. He doesn't know better. Our generation is people that didn't get a proper education. So what do you want from them? Right? We give them the benefit of the doubt. But without getting too much into the nuance over here, what I did want to just show you is what the Talmud says. The Talmud says, because there's a lot of questions we can ask. I mean, why did he have to break the tablets? You want to hide the tablets? Maybe you want to take them back upstairs and say, do you mind holding on to this for a little bit longer? I need to have a conversation with some people downstairs. I mean, you don't have to break the tablets. There's a story. There's a story here. This rabbi comes from the European shtetl. And he's coming to fundraise in America, the golden Medina, the golden country. He's coming to fundraise. He goes to this local temple, synagogue, and he's there on a Sunday morning or whatever, and he's at the Hebrew school. So he's fundraising. He says, would you mind if I tested some of the students in this American school to see, what they're learning in the American Hebrew school? It's 1947, right? So he comes in, sure, no problem. He comes in, stands in front of the classroom and says, can anybody tell me who broke the tablets? Nobody answers. So he turns to little Moshe and says, Moshe, do you know who broke the tablets? I swear it wasn't me, Rabbi. So, incredulous, the rabbi turns to the teacher and he says, did you hear what he just said? So the Hebrew school teacher says, I know this kid. If Morris said he didn't break the tablets, I promise you he didn't break them. The rabbi's agape. He's like, can I speak to the principal? He goes to the principal. He tells him what happened. The principal says, listen, Rabbi, they couldn't have costed more than $20. Take this and let's keep it between us. The state of education in America, right? Sad story, right? So Moses, how does Moses know what to do? It's not that Moses got instruction from anywhere else. He learned it, he extracted it from precedent. That's what he did. And in fact, we learn, by the way, at the very end of the Torah, the last words of the Torah, God tells Moses at the very last words of the Torah, Asher Shibarta, thank you. He says, Yasher Koach, thank you for breaking the tablets. Thank you for breaking the tablets. Now, I have to tell you, Nancy, that is a big sermon. There's a huge discussion as to what Moses was doing. And I'm going to tell you in a nutshell, just in one tiny nutshell, what Kabbalah tells us about what he was doing. Moses was teaching us that it's okay to be broken. It's okay to be imperfect. You can still have a beautiful relationship with God, even if you splintered, even if you're far, far, far from perfect. But that's a whole sermon. So God tells Moses, Yeshakach, I'm proud of you for breaking the tablets. In other words, God ratifies Moses' human logic using a term for strength and approval. Today, we're going to go down this route. We're going to explore this process of halachic precedent. Halachic means Jewish law, like Jewish law precedent, right? We're going to explore a 15th century German blood libel, a 14th century Spanish story, the amusing case of the synagogue scalper. What's a scalper? Those are the guys that... Right, they go and stand outside the stadium and they sell them the tickets. This is the scalper, yes, scalper. So we're going to have the 14th century Spanish story of the synagogue scalper coming up. We've got the new technologies from the 12th century to date, and then we'll explore the underlying mystical reasoning behind this style of learning. Let's go straight into it by introducing our first case, the 15th century German blood libel, right here.
In the spring of 1475, the city of Trent in northern Italy became the site of a tragedy. The body of 2-year-old Simon was found in a canal beneath the home of a Jewish family. Within days, all 18 Jewish men of the city were arrested. Under torture, they confessed to murdering the boy to use his blood in a Jewish ritual, an accusation with no basis in Jewish law or practice. All 18 were sentenced to death. The Jewish community of Trent was effectively erased. But the story didn't end there. A year later, in 1476, Bishop Heinrich of Regensburg passed through Trent on his way home from Rome. He learned that one of the tortured men had named Jews in Regensburg, accusing them of committing a similar crime nearly a decade earlier. Heinrich brought the confessions back to Regensburg. In the spring of 1476, the city arrested 17 of its most prominent Jews. Their families were placed under house arrest. Jewish assets across the city were frozen, and the torture began again. Some of the accused resisted. Others broke under pressure. The resulting confessions were contradictory and confused. Dates didn't line up. Locations varied widely. Yet the authorities pressed on. They needed physical proof. So on April 22nd, 1476, the cellar of one of the accused was excavated. After 3 days, bones were discovered, said to be the remains of 4 children. But doubts quickly surfaced. Ronnie Pochashar, in The Myth of Ritual Murder, writes, according to a legal brief in defense of the 17 Jews and presented at the imperial court, the excavation was not supervised by disinterested parties. Soldiers and authorities were not called in until the 3rd day, and one soldier actually expressed his distrust of the workers entrusted with the digging. Some thought the bones had been planted to frame the Jews. Men were seen removing bones from the Christian cemetery. At the imperial court in Vienna, Emperor Frederick III ordered the Jews' release. Regensburg officials resisted, asserting their city's autonomy for criminal cases. A tense standoff dragged on until May 1478, when a compromise was reached. The prisoners would be freed, but only after paying an exorbitant sum, 10,000 florins to the emperor, 5,000 to the city for the trial and prison costs, 8,000 more to cover a fine the emperor had levied against the city
for their disobedience in this case.
In total, 23,000 florins, an impossible sum. Though Jews across the region gave generously, it wasn't enough. The prisoners remained locked away. German rabbis convened in Nuremberg. Should they impose a tax on every Jewish community in the empire to free the Jews of Regensburg? How far could they go to buy justice?
Very sad story, true story. These are the realities of life in the 15th century. You know, just to put things in perspective, when we're worrying about a New York mayor with anti-Semitic bias, that ain't got nothing on where we're coming from, right? Obviously, it doesn't condone his behavior either, but, you know, right. So in text 2 and 3, you can read a little later, you can see the actual documents, you know, forensic evidence involving the children's bones was likely a setup, right? The historical account, and how the settlement of 23,000 gold florins was demanded. An impossible sum. I think we calculated it to be like tens of millions of dollars in today's numbers. But the question that arose was about the ransom payments. The rabbis gathered in Nuremberg, and they were inclined to impose a tax on the other neighboring Jewish communities. The rabbis wanted to, because the Jews of Regensburg couldn't afford to pay this. The question was, should we impose a tax on the neighboring communities, the other Jewish communities in the Holy Roman Empire, to pay for this? Would it be a mandatory tax? Or was it purely a voluntary donation? Voluntary donation, right? What's the difference between a tax and a donation? I mean, you can't seize assets against a donation, but you can seize against a tax, right? This was the question that arose, right? What do you, yeah.
Jack, you want the story to say about the Holy Roman Empire?
What?
The Holy or Roman Empire.
Interesting. Okay, coming from a historian. Oh, now it's an interesting question. Pidyon Shvuim. I was wondering if that would come up. So Pidyon Shvuim is the mitzvah of ransoming captives. And who more than us, a generation traumatized by 2 years of hostages, more than 2 years of hostages, finally rescued, not released, rescued just a few weeks ago. We know that you're not allowed to overpay. Well, I don't think that was your question. Your question was, it's a mitzvah of ransoming hostages. That's your question, right? Okay. Yes, there's a mitzvah to ransom hostages, absolutely. But can somebody come knocking on your door and take collateral? Can they repossess your car, Harvey, because you didn't ransom the captives? No. It's voluntary. That was the question. The question, of course, anybody can donate if they want to. But the question is, can they make it mandatory? That's the question. Right? What do you think? You don't think so? Okay. Anybody else? What do you think? Okay. Now, I want to just say, by the way, that, you know, you're not allowed to overpay for captives. You're not allowed to overpay. So there's a whole emotional, because if you overpay for captives, then you're incentivizing future hostage taking, right? Here, this became a very messy standoff, as you saw in the video. The emperor wanted them released, and the city was kind of holding their ground, and there was fines involved. The emperor was fining the city. They basically said, look, if you guys can come up with the money, we'll just make like nothing happened, right? But if they would be executed, it would sort of validate the accusation, and that would be dangerous. So the Jews, or the neighboring Jews, would actually, by paying the ransom, they would be discouraging instead of encouraging more such circumstances to happen again. So here you got a question. There's a lot of gray area. It's very conflicting. You can look at it from different perspectives. You can look at this from different perspectives. Yeah.
How does that discourage other cities from doing the exactly the same thing?
Right. So that's what Steve is turning his nose up about, right? If they paid the ransom, would that not be now? If somebody was getting rich off of this, then it would be encouraging future such ransoms. But here, it wasn't that case because it was really fines. It was fines. The king wanted them released, right? The king didn't even want them. So there was like a royal fine because the king was insulted. The emperor was insulted that they went against his ruling. And then there was a fine that he put on the city, the 8,000 florins, right? And then there was the 5,000 florins, which was just, the hotel bill for 2 years in the Ritz-Carlton of Regensburg where they had to stay, right? So nobody was getting rich off of this. I mean, without getting too much into the nuances of the case, let's just go with saying that in this particular case, nobody felt that paying the ransom would incentivize further such atrocities. And it was understood that by not paying the ransom and having them hanged, if they would in fact be executed for the crime, that would be a very big publicity event, right? Right, let's just presume with that. So how are we going to resolve this question? It doesn't say in the Torah whether you're allowed to impose a tax on neighboring communities in such a case like in Regensburg. It never came up before until the 15th century. A rabbi by the name of what's his name? Here. The rabbi was Rabbi Yosef Colon. They turned to the rabbi of Milan. This is Trento in Italy, right? Trento, right? Then it was right. So they turned to Rabbi Yosef Colon, the Maharik, known as the Maharik from, he was born in France, but he lived out there in Milan. And he turned to the following case in the Talmud. The case I'd like to draw your attention to is here on the screen. It also appears in the textbook at figure 3.1 and 3.2, where you have 3 cities, case 1 and case 2, right? You got 3 cities down. Can you see the ABC of the cities? Can you tell? So A is the top city, then B is the middle city, and C is the third city. A river flows downstream, right? Let me ask you this question. If in the first case scenario over there, the river water suddenly gets blocked by city B. If the river gets suddenly blocked and the water is not flowing anymore down to city C, who has to pay to fix the river? Anybody? What do you think? You say all of them have to pay why? You said they all benefit from it, okay? And you said what?
Primarily city B, because they're responsible.
Oh, because it's next to them. You're like the problem makers. You made the problem.
They deliberately block.
Okay. I didn't say deliberately. No, I didn't. You see, that's a good question. So why B? Because proximity? Because they're closest? Yeah, it's not a reason. Right? Right. Let me ask you another question. What about the second case? Now, the second case, the water's dirty. That's talking like about, let's call it sewage. Let's say sewage was flowing down there, right? Okay. Now, the sewage is not river water. This is sewage, right? In this case, the sewage gets stuck at city B. Now, who should be fixing it? Does it change your answer? Where it comes from? It's your sewage, right? So city A should be paying for it. What about city C? Should city C pay for it? Not connected. Not connected. Interesting. You're saying that they're not connected. Okay. Now, the Talmud rules regarding shared water systems that those upstream. Well, let's see for ourselves what it actually says here. Here, let's turn to text 4b. Oh, here, no, 4a. It's page 109. Okay? Page 109. This is from the Talmud. The Talmud says, concerning the digging of a river, the lower ones must assist the upper ones, but the upper ones need not assist the lower ones. The reverse is true regarding draining rainwater. Did you understand that? A little confusing, right, Talmud? That's why we need Rashi in the next text. Rashi is a super commentary. He explains to us what's going on. I mean, that was a bit of a mind twist, a pretzel of the brain. Let's take a look at how Rashi explains this in text 4b, page 110. When those upstream repair the obstruction in the river that's adjacent to their community, then the downstream communities are obligated to assist them. since a blockage upstream prevents water from flowing down towards them. Thus, fixing the upper section benefits those downstream. But the upper ones need not assist the lower ones when repairs are made downstream, because these do not benefit those upstream. In fact, the repairs below harm those upstream. The more water that rushes forward, the less water is available upstream, which risks their fields drying out. So in the first case, which is the case of the water flow, when there's a blockage, the people that are suffering from the blockage is the people downstream, right? The people upstream really have not engaged. In fact, it's a loss to them. We'd rather have more water for our fields. So the people that need to repair this are the people that are downstream. But what about when it's not a water river, but it's a sewage canal, which is case number 2? The reverse is true regarding draining rainwater, called it rainwater, okay? So draining rainwater is something which you don't want to, it's dirty. You don't want to drink this stuff. You want to get it out of the way. This applies to a city where excessive rainwater causes mud buildup and road damage. So a drainage channel is built to divert water outside the city. You want to get it away. If a blockage occurs in the section belonging to the lower residents, requiring it to be dug out, those upstream must assist. Now, the guys on top need to assist, because as long as the lower section remains clogged, water will accumulate and flood the upper areas. So in other words, who needs to fix when there's a blocked canal? The upper people, because they're the ones that are going to get sewage all over the place, right? However, the lower ones have no obligation to assist the upper ones in clearing drain blockages in the higher area, because the residents below favor that the upper water does not drain to the lower area. You keep your sewage up there, we don't want it. This is assuming, by the way, that the water is not going to flow down. It's flowing in a different direction. But the idea here is one simple idea that we can extract from here, which is actually exactly what Nancy said in the beginning. The idea is that you only pay for what affects you. That's the idea. You only pay for what affects you, right? So if you look back in the screen here, you see like this. So when the water is flowing in case A, case 1, right? Case 1, everybody needs the water. The guys downstream are not getting the fresh water. So they're the ones that need to pay for it. The guys upstream actually enjoy the excess water because they want it for their fields. So only the guys downstream need to pay, B and C. That's it. But in this case, where you want to get their sewage away from yourself, when there's a blockage, City C is very happy about not getting any sewage. They don't need to pay anything. It's City A and B, the ones that are getting flooded with sewage. They're the ones that are worried. So in other words, the rule is simple and straightforward. The Talmud is saying when it comes to damages through shared properties, shared assets, only the people that are affected need to make the payment. That's it. If you're not affected, you don't need to make the payment. You know, there's a good story about it. At the UJA, they had a fundraising meeting, and they had a meeting. They said, there's a certain lawyer, a Jewish lawyer in town, doesn't donate to our campaign. What are we going to do? What do? He doesn't donate to our campaign. So one enterprising young fundraiser in the UJA, he says, send me to him. I'll take care of him. I'm fearless. So he goes, he meets with the lawyer, and he tells me, he says, our records show that you've not donated to our campaign, to the Jewish community. Really, says the lawyer. And do your records show you that my mother-in-law has cancer, and she's chronically ill, and she has round-the-clock help, nurses all the time? Did they tell you that? Sheepishly, he says, no, I didn't know that. And then he says, and did your research at the UJA, did they tell you that my brother is in a wheelchair, he's a disabled veteran, and that his children have no breadwinner? Oh no, I didn't know that. And one more thing, and did your UJA research tell you that my sister-in-law, my sister is widowed with orphans? I'm so sorry, I did not know that. Well, if I didn't give to them a penny, then why do you think I'm going to give the UJA anything at all? So let me ask you this question. So, what do you think? Were you going to say something? Were you going to say something?
And one neighbor puts up the wall, and the result is that he's flooding this neighbor's yard. So the neighbor's yard, they can't grow any vegetables, they can't grow any food, because he's decided or putting up this wall. So
You're causing damage. If you're causing damage, it's a whole different story. If you're actually causing the damage, that was what Steve was saying. Whoever caused the damage, they're going to pay for it. But here it's assuming it's like some natural disaster. All right. So back to the story. Let me ask this question, Heidi. Let me ask this question. So what happens now, based on this Talmudic case? Let's go back to Regensburg. The Regensburg blood libel. Do you think, based on this piece of Talmud, that we've learned that only the people that are affected need to be solicited, are responsible? Aren't all Jews affected by what's happening in the blood libel in Regensburg? What a beautiful position to take. I'm just moved by your question. Like, wow, aren't we all responsible for each other? That's a very broad perspective. But are you willing to that's right, all this Hebrew coming out here today. Are you willing to be taxed for every problem that every Jew has? There's a limit. I mean, think about that for a moment, right? It's like, it's a nice gesture. But are you willing to actually guarantee the mortgage of every Jew? I don't know. That might be expensive, right? Right, it is different. Fair enough. I really like the angle that you're taking. I really like that. Is there anybody that would disagree with Nancy?
Well, but they should be responsible.
Should or should not? She's saying they should. They're not affected.
Always kind of with the argument that every Jew is affected. I know a Jew.
Yeah, you could get spiritual about it, but on a practical level, you're saying it's not their problem, like the water flow. Right. Interesting, Joel.
Practical, the Jews were executed for this crime that they didn't commit. Then the general perception was they were guilty, and all the Jews would be guilty.
Exactly, right.
Okay, so I just want to reiterate that. If an execution would actually take place to these 17 unfortunate Jews in Regensburg, that would be a stain of shame upon all Jews everywhere. You're standing with Nancy. Go ahead.
Yes, well, I like my epidemiological models
Mm.
of phenomena. So if you saw this as a mind virus, this notion that the Jews are guilty of blood libel and rape for.
Yeah.
So if you don't cure it, some form or fashion, it's very likely to spread. So it will affect downstream other Jews in the
Wow.
same fashion. So
I am moved.
So therefore, you do need to address the
The one lawyer here is yeah.
And here or not,
Yeah.
it's involuntary.
Harvey's a litigator. He's standing his ground here.
Doctor.
Yeah, UGA. Right. You want to make an appeal? Fine. So Harvey's happy to support every Jew, but as long as it's not mandatory, don't tell me how much and where. Right. Right. Okay. So yeah.
Correct.
It also strikes me that if you pay the money, you are implicitly saying they were guilty, but that you're gonna buy them out of their guilt.
Well, we already established that in this case.
Because of the complexity of the political context of the fighting that was going on, that we did choose to take the approach. Obviously, this is a huge story, but we did choose to take the approach that it would be far worse if they were executed than if they were liberated. Right? So we're gonna go with that approach because you could argue that. By the way, you could absolutely stand your ground in that bill. Totally. Let's see what actually happened. It's very, very interesting to hear the conflicting views here. It's quite special to hear them, but now we're putting ourselves into the responsa ourselves. Let's see what happens here, right? So one might think at first glance, this is what the Talmud says in Aramaic, the havamina, the I might have thought. The I might have thought, the initial first glance response is to say, who's in danger? Regensburg. Who is responsible? Regensburg, right? Just like the story of the river flow, of the canal. Whoever's in danger, whoever's being affected is the one that needs to pay, right? So only the Jews of Regensburg would be affected by this libel. They were the ones who had frozen assets and travel restrictions, the Jews of Regensburg. But neighboring cities were not having their assets frozen. They were not having travel restrictions, and therefore they were not obligated to pay. Comes the Maharik, Rabbi Yosef Kolon of Milan, and he establishes a principle. He established that a libel in one city creates a regional emergency, not just a local one, right? And in fact, had the Jews in Regensburg been executed, it would have spread like wildfire. Epidemiology, had they been released, the entire accusation would have been proven futile because everybody would say, you see, if they're guilty, then why they're walking free? Right? They're obviously not guilty. The whole thing was a sham. Let's take a look at his words. Maharik, it's text 5a, page 112. It is well known and widely recognized that the imprisonment of our brethren from the holy community of Regensburg, may their rock protect and strengthen them, is an event that poses potential harm and danger not only to Regensburg and its surrounding areas, but to many other communities as well. The rabbis who have gathered at Nuremberg to save those wrongly sentenced to death emphasize this point in their letter to me. Okay? He therefore ruled, based upon this principle, that the all neighboring communities were in fact obligated to pay. This was their problem, in fact. He used the Talmudic principle to say anybody who was affected by the dam, by the blocked water flow, by the blocked sewage, whoever was affected would have to pay. Now the question is, who's affected by a blood libel? And that's the decision that the rabbi needed to make. He argued that because the flood of persecution would eventually reach other towns, the flood of persecution, therefore everyone was a direct beneficiary of the settlement, and thus legally they were required to pay. Let's see how he writes that answer on page 114, text 5b. In my humble opinion, any Jewish community that is reasonably at risk and would almost certainly face the same fate, God forbid, if this matter is not properly addressed, these communities must take part in the financial burden. Saving the holy community of Regensburg ultimately means saving themselves as well, while the opposite outcome in Regensburg would bring dire consequences to them. Heaven forbid. Even though at this moment the libel at this moment is directed only at Regensburg and not at other locations, still, because the calamity would inevitably spread to them as well, they are judged based on what is bound to occur, obligating them to contribute to the expenses of saving the holy community of Regensburg. May their rock protect and rest and strengthen them. Evidence, in my opinion, can be found in the Talmud. This is his precedent. Tractate Bava Metzia, which obligates those living higher up to assist those below in repairing a drainage channel to direct water out of the city. The reasoning is that if the lower waters do not flow out, then the upper waters will remain trapped in the higher areas. So they're affected. The ones affected need a repair. It is obvious that when the water is blocked at the bottom of the channel, it doesn't immediately impact the higher portion of the channel. It's not my immediate problem, but it will be. Rather, the water gradually rises until it affects the upper area. Nevertheless, because the damage will eventually reach the upper area, there is no distinction between earlier and later, and the people higher up are required to assist now. Same applies here. Even though the immediate harm and danger is currently befalling the holy community of Regensburg, it is well known that others are also at risk. Epidemiology. Heaven forbid. They are therefore obligated to assist them, as I have explained. So without getting stuck into the river analogy and the water flow, that you're going to really understand that. The point is, only those affected need to pay, even if they're going to be affected later. Now, what he's saying, what Maharik is saying is therefore that who's in danger? Who's in danger now is Regensburg and other communities. And who is obligated to pay is Regensburg and the other communities as well. Right? So when you ask the question, he addresses this. What about the fact that they weren't yet in danger? They weren't yet in danger. We'll see that he says that they're going very soon to be in danger. He rejected the claim that the danger was uncertain because he noted a clear pattern of conspiracy that made the threat more than just, well, they made the threat a legal certainty. He's going to show you that it wasn't just possible, it was actually probable. And I want to turn your attention to the chart on page 117. Very sad chart to look at over here. A map, figure 3.3, page 117. These are libels during the 1470s in the Holy Roman Empire. Blood libels. Does anybody know? These are blood libels and also host desecration. Does anybody know what a host desecration is? What's a host desecration?
The Holy Sacrament of the Catholic Church, just to be the host, the embodiment of the guy.
Of him, yeah.
By tampering with it, you are getting a crime.
Killing him all over again.
Yeah.
Right. So why did you say it happens every week? Why do you say that?
We create a prior religion to violating this code every week. So.
Okay. So I want to just say a host desecration. They we serve here at our Kiddush, we serve brisket, we serve lemon chicken and crackers. Yeah, we serve single malt scotch, but I've never been to church where, from what I understand, they serve cookies, right? The wafer. It's a wafer.
Water.
It's what? It's a wafer. Okay. I'm no expert in this. But from what I understand, they serve a wafer, and that wafer is the body embodiment of him, right? Dipped in wine, got it. Okay. So I don't know. They might, yeah, maybe it's like a spiritual religious experience. They consecrate the wine, they consecrate the wafer. But what happened was, I don't want to get distracted.
Just know as much about the rituals of the Catholic.
Hang on, let me finish this one. So what happened? What's the host desecration? Just like the Jews were accused of killing Christian children and eating their blood or baking the blood into matzah, which is so ironic, because matzah is only allowed to be made out of two ingredients: water and flour. That's it. You can't put eggs, nothing in there. Nothing. The blood is 100% trace. You know what we Jews do when we find blood in our food? We check our eggs. When you check a chicken egg, and you if you may remember your mother checking a chicken egg, what was she looking for? A blood spot. If there's a dot of blood, it's gone. Right? We don't even eat a drop of blood, and never mind human blood. It's ridiculous. So the host desecration was an accusation. Sometimes they found that this host, they left it out for weeks over there. They found it developing red spots. And they said it must be that the Jews came and beat this thing till the person it represents is bleeding. They didn't know anything about mold, right? They didn't know anything about mold, red mold, green mold, right? So tragically, this was something that became an accusation, like the blood libel against the Jews. Take a look at this map. It's terrible. When you see this map, Endigen, 1470, 3 Jews executed. Pforzheim, 1470, 4 Jews executed. Frankfurt, 1470. Jewish community offers the emperor money, who intervenes and saves them. 1474 in Regensburg. Rabbi Yisrael was arrested but released. Then you have another case of accusation of host desecration. 18 men killed in 1475. 17 Jews arrested. That's our story. In 1476. In Passau, 1478, 6 killed, 40 forced to convert. The rest expelled. And then it goes to, it's ridiculous. This is all in the space of 8 years. In 8 years. That's what happened over here. So the Maharik wasn't coming in a vacuum to say, well, I think this might spread. No. He knew exactly what he was talking about when he made this ruling. This was the culture within the context with which they were living. And now let's look at the words that he says. It's page 116. One might attempt to distinguish and argue that in the Talmudic case, the obligations for those higher up to assist is because the eventual damage to them is inevitable. When the water rises and the river flow, the water is going to eventually, if it's a dam, it's going to flood the upper city as well. However, you might say that the spread of this false and slanderous accusation of the blood libel to other places is uncertain. You may want to say it's different. You may want to say it's probable, it's possible, but not probable, right? But in truth, we see that sadly, there's a focused conspiracy to attack and incite against us. May God in His abundant mercy save us from their hands. In such a situation, the harm is considered to be certain. And that was the rabbinic ruling about such cases. As it said, praise is the person who is always vigilant. This is the rabbinic response. The rabbi took a piece of Talmud about a river blocked, about a sewage canal, and he explained it, he used that as a precedent to interpret it to a case of a real blood libel, where 23,000 florins, astronomical amount of ransom needed to be raised and taxed upon the Jewish community in order to ensure that the others wouldn't, that this wouldn't expand to other places. So the Marik treated the payment as a debt, meaning that people were required to sell personal items or to take loans to pay their share. How much they needed to pay, he wasn't getting involved. He left that to the rabbis. And indeed, on September of 1480, all 17 Jews were freed through ransom. Now, it is interesting to know that this ruling was prescient. Because after this settlement, you saw how many blood libels happened in 8 years? After the settlement, such ritual murder accusations ceased in that region for decades, until Emperor Friedrich III's reign ended in 1493. Well, it took another decade before the next blood libel rose, and therefore he was right. In fact, it did end up saving the Jewish community from blood libels. What? No, they stayed. Oh, no. 1492 was in the Iberian Peninsula. This is Germany area. Yeah, this is Germany. Yeah, so that was the other side of the world. Yeah, okay. And that concludes the first of our cases today, the longest one of our cases. Heavy story, but isn't it amazing to take a case of a stuffed canal, to interpret it as precedent to a real life scenario of taxes, which were then imposed upon the Jewish community. Let's move over to the curious case of the synagogue scalper. The reality in medieval Spain was that people would treat seats in the synagogue like you treat a parking spot in New York City. If you're lucky enough to own a parking spot in New York City, heaven help the soul that parks in your spot, right? Right? You know the feeling, right? This is hallowed ground, right? So people would treat the seats as actual real estate, which could be leased.
That was only theirs.
Absolutely, they would sell. You know, there's a shul in Aventura. What? That plaques. There's a shul in Aventura that did a building campaign not too long ago, Nancy. They sold every seat for $50,000. And you get your name on it. They did the same thing? Yeah? Nancy, you get your name on it. It's yours. Now, I'm not sure what the synagogue bylaws say about this, but they might say that if you're not there by 11 a.m. on a Saturday morning, maybe you forfeited your right. I'm not sure exactly how it works. But in medieval Spain, people would if you couldn't afford a seat, it was like not being able to afford a house. What do you do if you can't afford a house? You rent. You'd rent the seat from someone, right? You'd pay lease. You could mortgage it. You could inherit the seat. There were different rules and laws about how this worked, right? You know, there's a story of what? It was mainly in the Spanish lands. In Ashkenazi lands, they didn't really do that. Ashkenazi lands did not view the seats as private assets. Private assets. You could list on your balance sheet that I have 2 seats in the local synagogue. By the way, you know the reason for this is because to open a shul was very, very complicated. If you wanted to open a shul, you were not allowed to do it. I want to read you a code. Here's a code produced in Castile, Western Spain, in the 13th century. It says like this in the code. A synagogue is a place where the Jews pray, and a new building of this kind cannot be erected in any part of our dominions except by our order. Where, however, those which formerly existed, they are torn down. They can be built in the same spot where they originally stood, but they cannot be made any larger or raised to any greater height or to be painted. A synagogue constructed in any other manner. If you decided to open a shul in your garage or your living room, right, shall be lost by the Jews and shall belong to the principal church of the locality where it is built. Now you understand why there's a problem with seats, right? Okay. So what happened is, right, Arabic. So what happens here is, you know, there's a story about a very difficult to see show in Broadway. The producers, is that the producers? Difficult, hard to get tickets. So this couple, they finally get tickets and they're really excited. They're sitting in the second row, sold out show, and they notice right in front of them is a woman, and the seat next to her, it's empty. When the intermission happens, and there's still not a person there, they tap in the lady and they say, you know, we noticed the seat next to you is empty. Whose seat is this? She says, I'm so sorry, it's my late husband's seat. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to be insensitive. No, no, it's fine. It's fine. Then the lady behind, she says, I don't understand. I'm sorry for the loss of your husband, but don't you have a friend? I mean, this is such a sought after show. Don't you have a friend or someone you could have brought to take the seat? She says, no, all my friends are at the Shiva. Take the seats very seriously, right? So the story that we're learning now, the story we're learning is about the wealthy man, an investor in Xàtiva, Spain, who bought a large block of seats and decided to inflate the rents. Is that the same joke or a different joke? Get a second win there. That's good. So this guy, this investor, he decides to invest in the real estate in the shul. He buys out a large block of seats and he decides to raise the rents, preventing other people from attending services. You can't come to shul because you can't afford the new rate. Good. It's a real question, right? A guy comes to a temple on Yom Kippur, comes to the temple on Yom Kippur, and he says, the guard asks him, where's your ticket? I'm sorry, I'm not here to pray. I don't even believe in God, actually. I'm only here because, I'm Jewish, but I'm working with Yom Kippur. I don't believe in God, nothing. I just need to talk to my partner because it's a very important business deal. I need to get his okay to approve the deal. I just need 5 minutes. The guard laughs at him and says, ha ha, I've heard that 100 times before. No ticket, no pray. Sorry. He says, listen, my partner's doesn't have his cell phone with him. He's in the synagogue. It's inappropriate. I can't reach him. I need to talk to the guy. He's begging on all fours. Eventually the guard says, listen, I'm going to let you in for 5 minutes. But heaven help you if I catch you praying. Right? So the question was posed. Here's the question. The question was posed about the people that couldn't afford to pay the rent. The shul wanted to add more seats. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to add more seats in the aisles. This is a very important question for you, Rob. They wanted to add more seats in the aisles to narrow the aisles so that people would have more place to sit. Meanwhile, this guy, the owner of the investor, the synagogue scalper, he says, you're diminishing the value of my seats. I don't want. I bought a seat with a nice wide pathway. I'm not interested in having a narrow pathway to my seats. I want good real estate. What are you gonna do? What do you think? You think you could? Well, he was complaining about the. As multiplied too. So he was worried about the access. Let's take a look at the question that was posted on page 119. Here's the question. To Xàtiva, to the God-fearing Rabbi Pinchas bar Shelemia Lunel. This question was posed to Rivash Rabbi Yitzchak bar Sheshes, 14th century. Okay, he's known as Rivash. Question: a community has a synagogue in the city. A wealthy man from the city purchased many seats there at a low price. Due to his actions, the value of the seats increased. As the price rose, he raised the rental fees to the point that the renters were deterred from attending the synagogue because of the high cost of seating. The community wanted to add more seats in the available spaces within the synagogue and sell those seats to various people. This would benefit the community financially and also encourage more people to attend the synagogue using the newly added seats. Sounds like it makes sense. However, the wealthy man objected, arguing that the new seats would restrict access to his seats, even if there would still be sufficient space to pass through. The passage would be narrower than before. You asked whether the wealthy man is justified in his claim. That's the question. No, you don't think he's justified? No right. He's not justified.
Well, he's synagogue. He owns his seats. They can't do anything to his seats, but he doesn't.
I live in a semi-gated community. And I'm pretty sure that what happens in the road in front of my house, do I have a right to comment on that or no? About the road in front of my house, the gated community road. I don't own the road. Like if the HOA decides to build homes, like little baby homes on the street, I probably have a right. Yeah, I remember the HOA, right? So maybe he's a member of the HOA. Think of that, right?
He doesn't get
A vote. It's an interesting question, right? By the way, we bought here, we did this in the local cemetery. we noticed the prices in the local cemetery were skyrocketing. So what we did here at the Chabad, we bought 150 plots, like 10 years ago. We bought them when they were dirt cheap, mind the pun. And today, today it's crazy. I mean, the price today, it's expensive to die, let me tell you. You can take out a mortgage, right? But thank God, what we've been able to do is we've been able to lock in our prices. We're half the price of the rest of the cemetery. And we're very proud to do that. In fact, our cemetery is becoming so popular. We're actually having to we're putting up a fence now because people are dying to get in. Okay. Okay, so what are we going to do about this, right? So the community tried to build new seats in the aisles, right? What are you going to do? So came Rivash and he brought up the following situation. I'm going to show it to you on the screen here. So this is a Talmudic case. We're about to read about it in the Mishnah. If you remember the courtyard, see the courtyard on there in A, right? So you're living in A, and then somebody decides to put a bench. You see where B is right there? He wants to put a bench by B, right? Blocking the access. You see where B is? I don't have a pointer. So are you allowed to do that or not? In a shared lane, can a neighbor infuse a bench somewhere that forces them to have to go around the bench in order to get to their own property? So the Talmud says like this on page 120, text number 7. Rav Huna says, if a resident of a lane, of an alley, wants to build a structure on the lane adjacent to their courtyard entrance, the other residents of the lane can prevent this. Why? Because it will require them to circumvent the structure. They're going to have to walk around it. It's going to restrict their normal access to their property. So how would this apply to the shul seats, this principle? How do we apply this to the shul seats? Can we?
Yes.
Yes, what?
Yes, it's applicable that the owner of these seats
Has the right to block them, to block them from tightening his aisle. Because this is my, my access, my runway. I need to have my runway, right? My seats are going to lose value if they got a narrower runway. You don't like this. Janet, you don't like that position? Why don't you like this? Yeah, get a narrow the aisle. He's not blocking. It's just going to be a little tighter. So, Janet, I respect the fact you don't like it, but what's beautiful is the Talmud has a precedent which has been taken from benches in a courtyard to synagogue scalpers, right? Where we've made a precedent, but don't give up hope just yet. I'll tell you why. So the Rivash actually sided with the investors' property rights, agreeing that the community could not unilaterally diminish or narrow his aisle space. But he did come up with a very practical solution. Rivash, the rabbi, came up with the following solutions. He did say, look, you can't make the aisles narrower, but you can make you can regulate the local trade and prices. So you can cap the rent rates. What's it called? Landlord, whatever. Rent control. There you go. You can make rent control that you can't suddenly say, well, this is the last seat left in the synagogue. It's going to be $1 million a year. You can't do that. You can make rent control, right? So in other words, he authorized the community to set rent caps on the seats, ensuring public access while still respecting property law. Let's take a look at that. Text number 8. He said, first, he quoted page 122. He quoted the Talmud, where the residents of a city may establish local standards for measurements, product pricing, and wages, and impose fines for non-compliance. So, can make the aisle smaller, but you cannot gouge the prices, right? Good. And that's how he ruled, right? So he defended the property owner, but at the same time, he still was able to subvert. Yeah. Let's move on to another very interesting discussion about technology. I know that Joel is interested in the technology concept. What happens with human inventions? Judaism views human inventions as a way to express divine honor, to honor God. And all modern technology needs to be utilized as in the service of God. We've always been early adapters as Jews. But the new tools prompt many legal questions. So for example, when the satellites became a thing, Chana's father, in 1981, I think it was, Chana's father did something called Hanukkah Live, where he lit the menorah in 770 Eastern Parkway, the Rebbe's headquarters, and Paris, and Moscow, and Johannesburg, and Melbourne, all at the same time, through satellite hookup. It was an amazing thing. It was like a global Hanukkah lighting in a way, you're supposed to light the menorah in public, right? This was like public like never before. So the Rebbe very much encouraged satellite. In fact, Yochannan's parents got engaged after 3 dates. They asked the Rebbe for a blessing to get engaged, and the Rebbe's response to them was "Azoy Schnell, Azoy via satellite." So fast like a satellite, because that's what he did. He would bring technology to Judaism. When they wanted to teach Tanya, the founding text of Chabad, on the radio, a lot of people said, "Oh, it's not appropriate to teach Torah on the radio." But the Rebbe's like, "No, on the contrary, you should." When I teach Torah on YouTube, I do get some criticism from people that tell me that's inappropriate. But you got to use modern technology and spread the word, right? Do what you got to do, right? So let's take a look at some of the patterns of development that happened in the past 800 years. So I think you have this in your book on page 124. I'm going to just look at some of these concepts here, just very briefly. The astrolabe we'll talk about in a moment, but the second one is the hourglass. You see the hourglass? A sand clock. Are you allowed to use a sand clock on Shabbos? Because you want to flip it. Every time you flip it, you want to mark down a number so you know how many times you flipped it, right? If you can't mark it down, it's hard to use a sand clock, right? There was actually a real story. Are you allowed to do that on Shabbos? Because you can't write on Shabbos. There was actually a real story by Yehuda Arya of Modena. He was asked a question in Venice on the 21st of Tammuz of the year 1620. This was a real question. May one use an hourglass on Shabbos to limit the sermon on Shabbos? This is a real question. Can you show up to shul with an hourglass to put it in front of the rabbi so that the rabbi would see how many times it's being flipped? It's like 30 times we turned this thing over, right? The ruling was, he asked only about sermons, and he wanted to know for many he said because quote unquote, I'm quoting directly, for many people fear the sermon because it intervenes with lunchtime. That's what he said. This was in the 1620 response. And the answer was, yes, you're allowed to. That was the ruling. It was an actual ruling, right? And nothing changed. There's a story about that too, but I don't have time for that one. So, I gotta say the story. This non-Jew shows up in shul. This non-Jew comes to shul with his Jewish friend, and he wants to experience the Jewish religion. So, he comes into shul, and he sees the kippah, so he asks his friends, what does the kippah represent? And he tells them the awe of God. And what does the tallis represent? And he tells them about the God embracing us. And what does the prayer book represent? And why the men here and the woman there? Everything he asks him a question. Eventually, the rabbi gets up, and as the rabbi gets up to speak, he takes his watch off. He says, now the rabbi's going to give a sermon, okay? The rabbi takes his watch off, puts it in front of him. And then the Gentile asks his friend, he says, what does it represent when the rabbi takes his watch off and puts it in front of him? So now the Jew says, that I have no idea what it represents. It has absolutely no bearing on reality, so I have no idea. Okay, so, when the printing press was invented, there was a question, you can look at these a little later, but when the printing press was invented, the question was, does a printed Torah book have the same holiness as a Torah scroll? You think not. Actually, it does. Well, not the same as the Torah scroll, but it does have holiness. So you're actually right. Yeah. Well, the question was really asked, does it have the same sanctity as handwritten books? That's what it was. As handwritten Torah books. If it's printed. That was the question. The answer was yes. Another question was about the smallpox vaccine. Are you allowed to use it on Shabbos if it was delivered to your village on Shabbos? And it's not going to be here after Shabbos. Are you allowed to get vaccinated, like you have to, which involves various labors? And the answer was the best way to do it is through specific procedures to avoid work violations, like you can ask the Gentile to help you in other places. When electricity was invented, they wanted to know if you're allowed to use it for Shabbos candles. Can you use electric candles? For example, if you're in a hospital and you asked, you just gave birth, right? And you want to light Shabbos candles in the hospital, they don't take it very well when you want to light candles near the oxygen tanks. So you are actually allowed to flick the lights. You make the blessing after you flick the light switch. Then you go like this, make the blessing, and then you open your eyes. You are actually allowed to fulfill Shabbos candles with electricity, but you're not allowed to do that for Hanukkah candles. Did you know that? Interesting, right? So most recent The most recent inventions we're going to talk about in lesson 6. Okay, so I just want to mention that the most recent inventions like AI, ChatGPT, we'll be talking about that stuff in the final lesson of the seminar. But for right now, I do want you to explore when you're ready. Figure 3.5, which is on page 122. It's the whole infographic, several pages, exploring 800 years worth of some interesting inventions. But I want to focus on one today. But one thing I want to say to you, when you look at these questions and the dates of the questions, they were always right. The questions were posed very soon after the invention happened, showing how quickly they were always embraced by the Jews. Let's move on to introduce you to the astrolabe. Does anybody know what an astrolabe is? One person, anybody else? You don't have an astrolabe at home, Sandy? Okay.
What time is it? What time is it? If you glance at your iPhone, it's so simple to tell the time. But I'd like to ask you, how would you tell the time if you didn't have an iPhone? How would you tell the time, say, 600 years ago? How would you do it? Well, the way you would do it is by using a device that's called an astrolabe. So an astrolabe is relatively unknown in today's world, but at the time, the 13th century, it was the gadget of the day. It was the world's first popular computer, and it was a device that, in fact, is a model of the sky. So the different parts of the astrolabe in this particular type, the reed corresponds to the position of the stars, the plate corresponds to a coordinate system, and the mater has some scales and puts it all together. If you were an educated child, you would know how to not only use the astrolabe, you would also know how to make an astrolabe. And we know this because the first treatise on the astrolabe, the first technical manual in the English language, was written by Geoffrey Chaucer. Yes, that Geoffrey Chaucer in 1391 to his little Lewis, his 11-year-old son. And in this book, little Lewis would know the big idea. And the central idea that makes this computer work is this thing called stereographic projection. And basically the concept is, how do you represent the three-dimensional image of the night sky that surrounds us onto a flat, portable, two-dimensional surface? The idea is actually relatively simple. Imagine that the Earth is at the center of the universe, and surrounding it is the sky projected onto a sphere. Each point on the surface of the sphere is mapped through the bottom pole onto a flat surface where it's then recorded. So the North Star corresponds to the center of the device. The ecliptic, which is the path of the sun, moon, and planets, correspond to an offset circle. The bright stars correspond to little daggers on the reed, and the altitude corresponds to the plate system. Now, the real genius of the astrolabe is not just the projection. The real genius is that it brings together two coordinate systems so they fit perfectly. There's the position of the sun, moon, and planets on the movable reed, and then there's their location on the sky as seen from a certain latitude on the back plate. Okay, so how would you use this this device? Well, let me first back up for a moment. This is an astrolabe. Pretty impressive, isn't it? And so this astrolabe is on loan from us from the Oxford School of Museum of History. And you can see the different components. This is the mater, the scales on the back. This is the reed. Okay, you see that? That's the movable part of the sky. And in the back, you can see like a spiderweb pattern, and that spiderweb pattern corresponds to the local coordinates in the sky. This is a rule device, and on the back are some other devices, measuring tools, and scales to be able to make some calculations. Okay. You know, I've always wanted one of these. For my thesis, I actually built one of these out of paper. This is a replica from 15th century device, and it's worth probably about 3 MacBook Pros. But a real one would cost about as much as my house. I own the house next to it, and actually every house on the block, on both sides of the street, maybe a school thrown in, and so, you know, a church. They're just incredibly expensive. But let me show you how to work this device. So let's go to step 1. First thing that you do is you select a star in the night sky if you're telling time at night. So tonight, if it's clear, you'll be able to see the summer triangle, and there's a bright star called Deneb. So let's select Deneb. Second is you measure the altitude of Deneb. So step 2, I hold the device up, and then I cite its altitude there, so I can see it clearly now. And then I measure its altitude. So it's about 26 degrees. You can't see it from over there. Step 3 is identify the star on the front of the device. Then it is there, you can tell. Step 4 is I then move the sky, so the altitude of the star corresponds to the scale on the back. Okay, so when that happens, everything lines up. I have here a model of the sky that corresponds to the real sky. Okay, so it is, in a sense, holding a model of the universe in my hands. And then finally, I take a rule and move the rule to a date line, which then tells me the time here. Right, so that's how the device is used. So I know what you're thinking. That's a lot of work, isn't it? Isn't it a ton of work to be able to tell the time as you glance at your iPod to just check out the time? But there's a difference between the two, because with your iPod, you can tell, or your iPhone, you can tell exactly what the time is with precision. The way little Lewis would tell the time is by a picture of the sky. He would know where things would fit in the sky. He would not only know what time it was, he would also know where the sun would rise and how it would move across the sky. He would know what time the sun would rise and what time it would set. And he would know that for essentially every celestial object in the heavens.
So the astrolabe is obviously an interesting device. We don't have them around today because we have iPhones. It was the iPhone of its generation, of its time, 800 years ago. Astro means a star. Labe means to take, to take a star. And as soon as this became a real thing, you know, only Jews, there's certain questions that only Jews ask. Like this morning in Shul, I asked somebody, "Hey, Richard, what's your name?" Because you want to know their Hebrew name, right? So it's a funny way to talk to someone. Only Jews will say, "Hey, honey, what time does the New Year start?" You know, we're very meticulous in time, right? So we need to know these things. It's very important. If Yom Kippur ends at 7:52 or at 7:51, you know, it's a big difference, right? So we want to be very meticulous about the time. And the question that was therefore asked was about the astrolabe. Is it permitted to use an astrolabe on Shabbos? What's the problem? Is that you're not allowed to build anything on Shabbos. That's why. You're not allowed to build anything on Shabbos, right? So this question was posed to the Rashba in Perpignan on the border of Spain and France. My friend actually lived there until he passed away not too long ago. And that was the question that was asked. Are you allowed to assemble the medieval star tracker? Is that a violation of Shabbos, of construction on Shabbos, or not? Right? Interesting question. So the Rashba came up with the following answer. He explained that assembling something loose-fitting does not fall under the prohibition of boneh, of building, and is therefore permissible on Shabbos and Yontiv. Let me just show you that piece of Talmud, page 131, where the Talmud says, in the house of Rav Chama, there was a sectional bed which they would reassemble on the festivals, like a Murphy bed or something. One of the sages said to him, "What is the reasoning to permit it? How can you build this bed on Shabbos?" He replied, "I agree with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who says that if it is loose-fitting, it is permitted." In other words, since the parts of the astrolabe were loose-fitting, loosely pinned rather than screwed in tight, assembly was permitted. It would be similar to putting a roll of toilet paper in the, you know, it holds tight, but it's not, it's just like a little, you know, or maybe putting on a lampshade on a lamp. It's not a major operation here. You don't even need a tool. It's just, it's a fixture. It's not a fixture. Yeah, it just comes in, it comes out. I'm curious to know. No, that's the question we're asking next. So one final question. So we did it. That's our third case. The third case is the astrolabe, just interesting, and drawing a precedent from the bed of Shabbos, that you're allowed to build a bed on Shabbos if it's loosely fitting. Same thing with astrolabe. You could build it on Shabbos. Precedent to give the responsa. One final question today, short, is the law of the sukkah. The sukkah, right? Once a year for 8 days, we move outdoors and we move into the sukkah. It's a wonderful glamping experience. We move outside. Many people sleep in the sukkah. We eat in the sukkah. You have to build your sukkah under the sky, right? And whenever you're in the inner cities, like in New York, you know you're in a Jewish building. When you notice, this is a sign to tell a Jewish building, when you notice the staggered balconies. You know, non-Jewish building, they should do balconies one under the other. But in a Jewish building, everybody wants access to the open sky for sukkahs. So they'll build it with staggered balconies so everybody's able to be under the open sky. Otherwise, you're going to have to schlep 8 flights downstairs to have your potato kugel. It just doesn't work. So this question was posed in Lodz, Poland in 1908. Lodz, Poland, 1908. Yes. Woj. I thought so.
Push, push, push.
Interesting. Okay, fine. Cool. All right. So when it comes to a sukkah, the sukkah's got to be built directly underneath the open sky. But what happens if a tree hangs over the sukkah, or you have one of those vines that hang over the sukkah? It's not kosher. What's the roof of the sukkah made out of? It's got to be made out of cut foliage. Cut foliage. You got to take palm branches or evergreens or something and chuck them on top, even bamboo, put them on top. But if it's connected to the ground, it's not kosher. So the sukkah's got to be directly underneath the open sky. You know, there's even a the question, therefore, that was asked was about a hot air balloon that was just invented. The hot air balloon was just invented in 1908. If a hot air balloon is on top of your sukkah, are you in a sukkah, or has it violated the status of the sukkah? Is it no longer a sukkah because it's now no longer under the sky? There's this huge thing on top of my head. What do you do? Let's look at the question, page 133. By the grace of God, before dawn, the 13th of Tishrei, 1908. Our teacher, Rabbi Shalom Mordechai Cohen, chief judge of the city community of Brezhny, live and be well. I've been struck by a new matter that has never arisen before. And inventors have recently brought into reality the ability to soar in a hot air balloon. Humans control it so that if they want to remain stationary at a high altitude, they can do so, remaining there even when there are strong winds. The hot air balloon is large in both length and width. He's describing a hot air balloon to somebody else. What is the halachic status of a sukkah if a hot air balloon is seen hovering directly above it? Might this render the sukkah invalid? You know, in Florida, we have these weird mosquito tents outside of our houses. What are they called, them? The screen cages. Yeah, the screen. It's not a cage. It's not really called a cage. Screens. Lanai. What do they call it? Lanai. Can you build your sukkah underneath a screened lanai? Oh, there's a screened lanai on top of your head. You can see the sky. Are you? Air's coming through, but are you really open to the sky? You're not. There's something there. Ask a mosquito if he thinks that he's open access. He doesn't have access, right? Think about that, right? So the inquiry was whether the balloon hovering above the sukkah acts as a roof, right? Is it a roof or not that disconnects the sukkah from the sky? So what do we do? What do you think? The answer is no problem. You don't think it's a problem. Hot air balloons, do whatever you want. How about if there's a Boeing 787 over your head? I mean, it's going to take a millisecond and it's gone, right? Not even, right? A nanosecond, right? Okay. So the precedent that was brought was from the law of impurity. As Jews, we're very, very sensitive to being pure and impure. If you are in the same building, under the same roof as a dead body, you cannot enter into the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. There are certain things that you cannot do if you're in a state of impurity. Have you ever heard of the red heifer, the red cow? The ashes of the red cow are part of a 7-day process that purify the impure person. You know, by the way, if you go to the old city of Jerusalem, the back of the Temple Mount, facing the Mount of Olives, which is the oldest cemetery in the world that is still in continuous existence. My grandparents are buried there. So if you face the back side of the Temple Mount, not the western wall side, the other side, facing the Mount of Olives, there's a gate in the Temple Mount. It's called Shara Rachamim, the gates of mercy. And the tradition is that is the gate through which the Messiah is going to emerge to the world. So what did the Arabs do when they heard about this? They bricked it up. It's bricked it up. You can see it's bricked up. But then, because they thought that way the Messiah won't be able to come. And then somebody told them that maybe he might have access to Home Depot. And he might be able to get a chisel and a hammer, you know. He might be handy. He might knock a hole through. So they came up with another ingenious idea. They figured that Jews become impure when coming in contact with the dead people. So when you drive on that road, you'll notice a little baby cemetery right there in front of that. It's like a random cemetery on that side of the road. And they put like Arab graves. What they didn't realize is that the only bodies that make you impure is Jewish bodies. But non-Jews don't make you impure. Right? It's a very interesting concept, right? So the law is that a priest, a Kohen, who's a descendant of Aaron, the high priest, is not allowed to become impure. A priest is not allowed to become impure knowingly. I got a real question this week of a son of one of our members who's a medical student, actually a dental student, and they brought in a cadaver. They brought in a cadaver to, I don't know what to do work on. And he was very upset because he's a Kohen. He's a priest, and he didn't want to be dealing with dead bodies. You know, Kohens don't go to cemeteries, they don't go to hospitals if they can avoid it, because there's mortuaries, morgues in the hospitals. We were looking to hire a rabbi here several years ago, and I really liked the guy. At one point, he tells me, it turned out that he was a Kohen. I said, "You're a Kohen? Huh? You're a Kohen?" I said, "1 second. You don't do funerals? You don't go?" He said, "No, I don't go to cemeteries." "How about hospitals?" He said, "I don't go to hospitals." I'm like, "You're a rabbi that doesn't do funerals and doesn't do hospitals. Then what do you do?" Didn't work out. All right, it's a true story. Didn't work out. Listen, I needed somebody that could, do the stuff, right? Help out. So the Talmud gives us a case of what happens if you're walking along your merry way, and and there's a dead body next to you. Let's say there's a dead person next to you, and then a blanket flies overhead. Are you considered under the same roof as this dead body now, and therefore you're now impure, or not? Right? Like, let's say you're a Kohen, and a Kohen is allowed to eat certain sacrificial foods, certain holy foods. Only Kohens are allowed to eat. But if the Kohen became impure, he can't eat dinner tonight because only the rest of his family can eat. He's got to what do they say in COVID? You got to isolate, segregate, separate, right? Because you're impure for 7 days, right? So if you're next to a dead body and a little blanket flies overhead, are you now impure? Same question with a boat. You're scuba diving, and there's a dead body near you, and a boat goes overhead. Are you under the same roof or not? So the Talmud rules, very interesting. Page 134, the following, this is from the Mishnah, the Oral Torah, the following do not bring impurity: a flying cloak and a ship floating on the water. So they don't bring impurity if you're under the same thing. However, if the ship is tied with something that keeps it steady, or a stone is on the cloak holding part of it down, they can bring impurity. So if it's tethered, then it does bring impurity. So it's considered a roof if it's connected to the ground. How would that apply to the hot air balloon? Tethered? I took my kids to Orlando. They have this huge hot air balloon, and it's actually tethered. So it goes up like 100 feet, and it stays and comes back down. Not for me. I don't do heights. It's not my thing. Unless my kids force me. But that was a tethered hot air balloon. That tethered hot air balloon would be an obstruction to your sukkah. But if you had a regular hot air balloon or a Boeing 787 LL Dreamliner jet or Bibi Netanyahu's Wing of Zion on the way to Mar-a-Lago, doesn't matter. It's fine. You can still eat in your sukkah because it's not connected, right? It's not connected, right? Now, let me ask you this question. What about a drone? If there's a drone overhead? No problem. How about a satellite? I mean, that's out there, right? But what about a screened lanai? A screen patio? Nancy, it's connected to the ground. The Mishnah has a different conclusion, right? And therefore that's the problem. So let me just conclude with this. Let me conclude by saying that we've learned today 4 different cases. We learned the case of the Regensburg blood libel that we ruled from the precedent of the plumbing issues, right, in the Talmud. We learned about this Rivasha seating problems in the synagogue, which we learned from the courtyard. We had a problem with the astrolabe, a question on the astrolabe. We resolved that from the bed of Shabbos. And finally, the hot air balloon, we resolved that from the dead body and the ship, right? The reason we have to rely on precedent is not only because it's practical, because we just don't have a clear-cut rule in the Torah. It's also meant to be that way. It's part of the divine plan. You see, Torah study is God's desire to partner with us mortals rather than a merely passive reception of data. If we would just be given every answer, then the human mind would not be a stakeholder in the divine plan. When we are commanded to toil in Torah, it's not only to learn what we need to know, but to be able to apply old laws to new situations as the highest form of a fusion of the intellect, our intellect, with the divine. If we only received it from above, then our creativity would be left out. If we just interpreted whatever we wanted on our own, then God's involvement would be amiss. This system fuses heaven and earth into one. where we become one with God's Torah, where our rulings, where our conclusions, our decisions are actually incorporated in God's wisdom. God and his wisdom are one, is what the Kabbalah tells us. And when we are able to study Torah to the point that we can innovate within the rules of Torah, not just by sucking out of our thumb, but by actually ruling it based upon real logical thought, like we've seen in today's 4 precedents, then we are becoming one with our Maker. And in fact, that is part of our mission in this world. There's one final text, text 14 from the Tanya. The Tanya tells us, page 138, that every one of us can reveal secrets of wisdom, to reveal and to innovate new insights in Jewish law, in halacha, and Agada, the revealed dimensions of Torah and the Kabbalistic sphere. Indeed, we are obliged to do so to perfect our souls. We're supposed to come up with Torah novelties, with novelties of Torah. We're mandated to innovate and to discover new Torah insights to perfect our soul. You see, in secular law, in American law, who makes the laws? Just the judges. If you're not a judge or a lawyer, then stay out of this, right? But in Torah, it's the mission of every Jew, right? Right? I'm a little concerned. Tomorrow I have jury duty. Jewry. I'd like to be here for jury duty, Jewry, but I'm going to be down there for jury duty at the city hall. And I shudder to think of being a person who comes judged, in front of individuals. It's very concerning. I don't know. But the Torah system actually does give value to the individual jurist, right? And that's why every Jew is supposed to publish their own novel Torah insights in fulfillment of our divine empowerment to partner in God's Torah, because God wants a relationship with us. Remember that when we pray, we're talking to God. And when we study Torah, God is talking to us. But let's make it a two-way conversation where we can be sanctified amongst the divine. Let's just conclude with a quick summary.
Lesson 3. Precedent in practice. 1. Moses' decision to break the tablets was an act of halachic reasoning by analogy, and God affirmed his conclusion. This set a precedent for rabbinic decision-making. Rabbis applying existing Torah principles when facing new questions and winning divine approval. 2. Whether it was Rabbi Yosef Kalon's bold ruling obligating all communities to help free the Regensburg prisoners, or Rabbi Yitzhak Bar Sheshet's nuanced handling of a synagogue seat shortage in Shativa, the responsa literature shows how rabbis applied existing Talmudic law to unique and unexpected situations. 3. Halachic rulings don't exist in a vacuum. Rabbi Yosef Kalon's decision wasn't just a legal interpretation. It was informed by a sharp reading of the anti-Semitic climate of his time. 4. Judaism sees human innovation as part of the divine plan, meant to be harnessed for goodness and holiness. But the emergence of the new, from the astrolabe during the Middle Ages to the hot air balloon in modern times, often raises new halachic questions. Rabbis have historically met these advances with a commitment to applying timeless principles to modern developments. 5. When we apply Torah law to new realities, we forge a sacred and profound bond between the human mind and God's will. 6. Every Jew is called upon to apply the Torah to new realities. While practical rulings are reserved for qualified experts, engaging in this process in a conceptual manner deepens our relationship with the Torah and with God.
This concludes our session today. Next week, God willing, we'll talk about flexibility in the law. When the apparent conclusion of the law conflicts with the issue at hand, we'll be exploring the fascinating concept of the heter, which is the loophole. We'll talk about it then, God willing, next week. Thank you very much for joining me here today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming. And feel free to send me an email. We'd love to hear from you guys. Your questions, thoughts, and comments. Thank you so much, Janet.